overview of your research. We have half an hour for comments and questions. The floor is open. Mark.
So one of the questions this brings to mind is, how far back do we expect memory to go? So here you've got a case where it's the grandchildren looking, asking to open the graves. And I'm wondering, is that the largest extent we can imagine? Or are we entering a new era of memory where, at least in forensic terms, where we're going to be able to go back even further? So one thinks, for instance, about slavery in the United States or the genocide of the indigenous cultures here, and you think, I guess we will, if we haven't already, gone back into those. And so I guess I'm just interested in your thoughts about, what difference it makes, how close in time the memory starts.
So,
Sure, let's take 2 or 3 at once.
Well, I thank you very much. This was a fascinating talk, and I was particularly interested by these sort of transnational movements of the different ideas that disappeared going from the Southern Cone to Spain. And I had a question about the exhumations, and then a question not related to exhumations, but to see whether there's a movement in memory terms as well. One thing that's striking to me is that they're borrowing from South America, but it's also a different context, so that in the South American case, the pictures of the disappeared became so iconic, and then even later when there were exhumations, I can't think, at least in public sites like the mothers and the grandmother sites, you don't see pictures of bones, and I think they would resist that movement. So that it started with Aparece con vida, we want our families back alive, that's the way you took them, so the resistance to depicting images of the dead. I have a sort of technical question that's really striking. I understand that these exhumations can't be for a criminal prosecution, but there must be some laws governing them. I just can't imagine that people can just go in and start digging and taking bones. There must be some Spanish laws that govern that sort of process. The question that's unrelated to the exhumations is what has become so prominent in Argentina is the search for children who were appropriated, disappeared, but not killed. And then there's this forensic element of the testing the blood and the DNA. And I just read press coverage maybe 6 months or a year ago that there are now starting to be stories about, during the Franco era and particularly through the Catholic Church, these children also being adopted out. And I'm wondering if there's borrowings going on in terms of memory there that are linking from what went on in Argentina to Spain.
well, starting by your question, thank you very much. Obviously, I understand that the context is crucial. That my point, I didn't have to develop it here, but is that once a figure of political violence, such as the forced disappearance, becomes a universal violation of human rights, it becomes a patrimony of the world. So, and then the thing is that every context is different. We have to understand, we have to use this new tool to think about repression, to better analyze the differences between the disappearance machineries, because it's very different in Argentina as it is in Spain. But I think that in Spain, one of the things that has happened in Spain is that it has happened so fast, and the public debate has been so poor. But I don't think we can get to these things. When I read the Argentinians, I see there's a lot of thinking, a lot of polishing, a lot of debate, and Spain is like a barren land. So it's just black and white. You are against or for, and no, you wouldn't want to be polluted by the Argentinians. But for example, I use Pradera because he belonged to the Communist Party, and he's a very complex figure, but. The thing is that he's not understanding that the Spanish disappear is very different from the Argentinian disappear. But there is borrowing, of course. There is borrowing, but then there is context. So there is like a balance between one thing and the other. And we have a friend in the Basque Country, Gabriel Gatti, I don't know if you know him, he's written on disappear, who is very upset that that the concept of the disappear is used in Spain, because he said, disappear are ours. And I said, well, you look like a victimhood nationalist. No? Why a category of victimhood?
He's from Uruguay. He's
from Uruguay, but so he says, but his family disappeared in Argentina. But it's like this is self-harm. So just leave us alone. Just invent something. But we would have like a tough debate with him, because some others, like some other friends of Alex, say that the Argentinian disappear is related to the Holocaust memories, and so the Holocaust comes to Spain through the Argentina. So these things have to be. I mean, we have to continue to analyze these things. So here in Spain, we are just trying to make sense of a process which has been extremely explosive, so to speak, and it's very difficult to see the contours of it, because it took place in the society of knowledge and information. And also, to what you referred, there is no criminal, I mean, there is no law covering these bodies, there's nothing. I mean, it's incredible, because they are, for example, the sanitary regulations do not affect them. So what happens is that when an association finds the bones, they go to the nearest judge, and they file a report saying, you know, we were just digging in the countryside and we found bodies with signals of violence. So the judicial police has to show up. When they see that it's civil war related, they just say, we can't do that. You know, they have prescribed 7 times. I mean, it's not, we cannot access these bodies. And then the judges just archive, how you say in English, archivar el caso? Or they just file, they just close the case. They just close the case. And so it's in a total limbo. And then these bodies have been moving around Spain. You know, if they are exhumed in Andalusia, the forensic laboratories in the Basque Country, you can just bring the bodies to the Basque Country. And if it were a recent body, you would have to ask permission to transit from every autonomous community from one to the other. But, yeah. These bodies is like, oh, they are from the civil war, just go ahead, because there's nothing. And they can be buried, and they can be reburied, and they can be unburied again, because they are very, very precarious. And this is what, so I was just kind of making it big when I said, you know, just go and get it. But there's nothing you can do, because we have no authority. I mean, the state just has established a subcontracting system, and then you are there. And what we do to gain some authority is we have these badges. You know, like, I'm a member of the team, you know, but then people are like, oh, I'm a member of the team, but I mean, they can just, I mean, there's nothing, there's no real authority, it's just, you know, we just make this up. And, so, and in relation to Barbara, I don't know how to answer to this, because how back? This is the first question when we started to work on this, like, Spain now? Why? 70 years later, what? And so it's also interesting, and we were talking about it during over lunch, because in Spain, at least in the Spanish legislation, when they are 100 years old, then they are under the umbrella of patrimony, historical patrimony, like the Romans or the Paleolithic caves. So in 30 years, they will be patrimony, but not now. They are just so. And if they are patrimony, they are treated in different ways. And obviously, but you know, to have this civil war, which is still alive, as form of these are very complex issues we will have to deal with in the future. But I don't know. But what I know is that this forensic, this increasing prestige of forensics linked to human rights is expanding, and many countries are going for the soldiers. No, well, I mean, here in the US, you have the Hawaii laboratory, and went to Vietnam for the MIAs and whatnot, and then you have the British also, since the very Second World War, First World War, just the Commonwealth, you know, just returning their own bodies and going to the colonies to. So this is happening more and more, and the question is why this fascination with bodies, and the actual recovery of the body. I have no answer to that. I was just trying to, we are just trying to make some sense of what's going on, but I think these are very important issues for research in the future.
There are two questions. Maria.
I was struck by the year you indicate, 2000. These things begin to be discussed nationally. I suppose that is the moment when folkloric knowledge turns into legitimate, public, legal, etc. knowledge, and networks are established. So the point I'm trying to perhaps understand is that you're talking about that divisionary line, not in terms of having been known, because knowledge of that apparently was way back there as folklore. Neighbors who knew about these internments, relatives who knew precisely where these people had been buried, etc. But that was very dispersed, apparently, from what you're saying. So there was a moment, 2000, things begin to gel together and things begin to happen. So it's not an issue of knowledge, right? Is it? It's these things were known, but then they were re-elaborated and reorganized. Am I correct?
Well, that's a very, very, very interesting point. Actually, what happened is that you said folkloric knowledge. There was, one of the effects of Francoist repression. Almost every village in Spain has a mass grave related to it, because what Franco did during the war, they slowed down the war so they could leave a message, so to speak, a repressive message in the rear guards. So when they would take a village, they would move slower, and then they would kill people from the village and put them in mass graves, sometimes in the village, sometimes 20 kilometers away, sometimes all the people from the same village, sometimes mixed up with others. So, but the message left behind is like, this is this is the future. I mean, dissidents will be underground. So I think that was very powerful, and this created a fear culture, which prevented in many ways the expression of this knowledge. And many of the people who experienced this on their own, in their own lives, the grandfathers and grandparents, so to speak, they didn't talk about this to their children or to their grandchildren because of shame and because of protection. They didn't want them to know or to become upset or to get into trouble because of this. So there was like a difficult generational transmission of this knowledge. So sometimes, as I am a social anthropologist, I'm not digging, in the exhumation, but I am outside of the exhumations, taking testimony, and I go with the people to their homes, and we get different kinds of materials, pictures, death certificates, and whatnot. So we build up files, and so sometimes there's a family coming to the exhumation to give testimony, and this is the first time this family talks about the issue 70 years later. So it's extremely interesting, because it becomes, I mean, for me it's like a methodology, it's a technique, a methodological technique, but for them it's a political act. And you are there taking testimony, but they are giving testimony publicly for the first time in 70 years. And sometimes they contradict one another. No, you never told me about this. Or, how come? Is this true? And just in front of the camera, it's really astonishing. And so this talks about this silence. So there was not, I mean, this folkloric knowledge you were talking about was short-circuited in many ways and in many villages, because they had to live side by side with people who had perpetrated these crimes, across the street or in your own house, because then you would be expelled from your house. And so the thing is that now, for the first time in many, for example, just imagine a conference just like this. I would give this conference, and then people raise their hands to talk, and like 90% of the people raising their hands would be to give testimony of the suffering, because they didn't have a legitimate space for doing it. And then this is a university, or in Spain, a Spanish university with a logo, and there's an institution, and then you go and give testimony. This has happened to us all the time. I think it's extremely interesting, and it talks about a deficit of testimony during many, many years. So the fact is that when it comes big time. It comes with bones and forensics and whatnot. And so this is really, I think it's really problematic. But this is the way it's happening. Thank you for your question.
I have first to say that I think this is an interpretation of the incapacity for many people to talk. I think things changed a lot. In the later Memoria Historica, it's 2007. The first socialist government is 1982, and they have absolutely majority. And I think after 1982, many people in Spain who has lived the repression start to have not only permission, but credentials when they were in the Republican side. Then I think it's a little tricky to say that now they have the opportunity to talk that they didn't have before. I think there's a civil war, there's a fear, but there has been at different stages where things have been changing. Other thing is, before the Memoria Historica, there are people like Javier Pradera, or what the ideology that he represents, that are trying to make justice with the Republicans, and we're introducing laws to have then the right to get a retirement, to recognition, etc. Meaning not everything wait until 2007 or Garzón to be legitimized or to have a right to be. My question say that because I'm one of that people who had a lot of concerns at a point with the Memoria Historica, and at one point was you are all the right or you are in favor of the way the Memoria Historica is portrayed. The question first is why wait until 2007 for the socialist government, the left, after being in government so long, to start questioning these things? And number two, do we have any evidence that this process is helping to make democracy more real or better, with all this question about how transition was done and how many things were or are today bad in society because we had that kind of transition? Is any evidence that this other kind of intervention is really deeping into the reconciliation? It's producing many books and it's producing many things, but we have any evidence that is really digging into a better reconciliation process?
Thanks for the question. They are very, very good questions. Like, we all, of course, there have been things about the reparation of those defeated, but very small, and piecemeal kind of but until the 2007 there was not a single law trying to cover all the fronts, so to speak, no? So we might ask Felipe González why he didn't do it. I mean, it's like, but his generation, which is Pradera's generation, or Pradera is older than him, but this generation who were political actors during the transition to democracy are defending the transition as a magnificent kind of political pact. It's the grandsons who are having to challenge this. And this generation, I think, but I have no idea of why, with this absolute majority, the socialist government didn't do much about it. Probably they thought it was better just to, there was a lot of noise. The left got to power, after losing the war. It was a very tricky moment, and probably they thought it was too much, or they thought it was gone with the transition. But this is a question I'm also asking. I have no answer to that. And in terms of the quality of democracy in Spain, I have to say that I'm very pessimistic, because I thought this was a good opportunity for having a deep debate about who did that. Because, for example, usually when you talk about this, there is somebody who is totally legitimate, in a very legitimate way, a Partido Popular voter or a right-wing voter. they will say, what about the other bodies? Why are you focusing on these bodies? And this is the reason I put this historical note, because the bodies of those who won the war had already been exhumed and put back into the family pantheons, and they have been rehabilitated, and their relatives were given, positions in the government, taxi licenses, and they won the war big, no? And then this is the leftover, and then. I don't think, and this is part of our effort, and we were talking with Barbara about this, has been to reframe the debate in comparative terms, because in Spain we have this tendency to drown in glasses of water. Maybe you have this expression in English, and we have this very little thing, and it has become very, very confrontational. And I thought it would have been in some other way, but it didn't happen this way. So we try to at least as intellectuals or as scientists, just trying to provide more nuanced analysis, so it was not black and white, just no up and down. But it's very difficult, as you know, in Spain to overcome this. And this says a lot about the lack of quality of Spanish democracy. I'm very disappointed. I mean, with the issues of corruption, the demobilization of society. This is just one of the instances in which Spain is showing the limits of the model. And this is leading some people to say, well, the transition created a model, a constitution, which should be reformed, because this is not working, it's been exhausted. So, the constitution is exhausted as of today. Its limits, doesn't allow the Spanish democracy to breathe. I mean, this would be one way of thinking about it. But yes, I was also very disappointed when I saw that it was not really helping in terms of reconciliation.
So we collect some more questions. Amy,
Thank you for an extremely rich presentation. There's a lot going around in my head. There were two things that struck me, and I just wondered what you might think of them. You talked not only about the connection with Latin America, but with Bosnia. This whole question of the disappeared, but I'm wondering if the adoption of the term really does have to do with the fact of a shared language that's also slightly different. So you have the fusilados, et cetera, and the desaparecidos. So it sounds the same, but it's not the same. And also the very presence of Latin Americans in Spain, like the Uruguayan whose family was disappeared, who are making, who are bodily present. So it's not just about the globalization of the world through the internet. There's actually the physical presence of people who then can contest. So it seems to me that there's something very complicated and rich there. That's one thing. And the other thing that I was thinking about was, I was struck by your saying that the state has no way to interfere, right, with the exhumations, that there is no law. But just looking at the images and hearing what you said about people coming up and saying, secure the perimeter, and we're wearing badges about, whose team is, who you're on the team, is that there just seems to be an enormous amount of self-policing, and that there really isn't so much a need for the state to step in with law, because the society seems, the people who are involved, who come, seem to want to be able to have created internal laws about how one deals with the exhumations, when one might be invited in to do the performance. I imagine that the folks aren't coming in and lying in the graves until they're invited to do it. So there's a lot of internal regulation that's going on there that really seems very, very interesting to me. And I don't know exactly where to go with it, but my sense was not so much that there aren't laws, but that there are laws. It's just they're different kind of laws.
Yeah, of course. But this depends on. I mean, the main problem is that the state established a funding line, which has been 20 billion euros, 2006, 2011, and there were projects that associations and agrupations of relatives could apply for them, and then the state would give the money to them. And then subcontracting human rights system. So that means that if you are lucky and you hit are right. For example, the technical team we work with, I mean, it has international prestige, but some other people do not have, they don't know where to go with this money. So there has been a lot of mismanagement of this money. Or for example, oh no, my son is in an archaeology major, he can do it. No, this has happened. I mean, it's like, oh my God. And so, it's like, because it's not just, I mean, you can be an archaeologist, but you know, to manage an exhumation is very complex in emotional terms, in political terms. A lot of things are going on around it in the village. You cannot be just a 17-year-old just picking up bones. It's way more complex. And the thing is that a lot of times it has happened. I mean, as there was no surveillance by the state, they just gave the money to the associations and then just do it yourself. No, it was the system. This has created a lot of problems. But at the same time, and you are totally right, and I'm also confused about it. Whenever the state has intervened, all the associations were protesting. Leave us alone. Like, don't do it. Now there is a memory law being drafted in Andalusia, in the south of Spain, and there is a big opposition to it by the associations because it regulates too much. And then protocols. Barbara is a specialist in this. Protocols were started to be established in different autonomous communities, and depending on the autonomous community, you would have to bring this or the other, or you need somebody to restore the objects. For example, in Aragon, you needed somebody to go and restore the objects. And then there is a watch, a pen, whatever. There has to be a specialist, so you have to pay for that specialist, which makes the exhumation way more expensive. And then you say, like, no, why you have to, you just give it to the family and they keep it at home. And, so when there is regulation, there are problems. When there are no regulations, there are also problems. But yes, I mean, this has been going on for the. But the main thing is that some associations even said that without legal framing, the exhumations were an erasure of genocide. They call it genocide or Holocaust. Because if you don't have a criminal case, you are erasing the evidence. Which is false.
Only 2 more minutes, so we agree.
Okay, very quickly. I think there is one person who could be helpful in the comparative process. It is Hans-Georg Gadamer and his work, Truth and Method. I'm just studying this because I do also work on memory, but on other conflicts. And it's amazing, all you said, including the Samson technique and so on, could be accounted for by some of the things he has written about and some of the secondary commentaries. So anyway, it's just a suggestion.
Thank you very much. No, it's wonderful.
I was just going to ask, if memory serves, you were on a commission that went into the Valle de los Caídos, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your experience there. I know you told me in private a couple of years ago about it, and you just had the slide up there, and you mentioned the transfer of bodies, right, was it in the 50s? But there has been, subsequent to the law of historical memory, an attempt to, I don't know, readdress or that issue, and so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is extremely complicated. As you were saying, the law of historical memory was passed in 2007. The socialist government lost power in 2011, so nobody really understands why, if the law asked for a commission to just bring out proposals to democratize this monument, which is very national Catholic, is still today. I was there last week, and it's just astonishing, the whole paraphernalia was not. They called us for this commission in 2011, when the socialist government already knew it was going to lose the elections big time. I mean, absolute majority on a landslide. So I think even Zapatero called the elections on November the 20th, which is the date of the death of Primo de Rivera and Francisco Franco, which is like a very charismatic, a very important date for the left, particularly the right, excuse me, the extreme right. So I accepted basically out of first because I think you have to be there when you are called by the state, and secondly because it was a great opportunity to do some kind of ethnography of power. I mean, if you don't go to the presidential palace and you don't see how things work, you have to talk about as a social anthropologist. So I decided to be included, but we were extremely critical of the government because of the timing, because they wanted us to give the report before the election so it could be used during the electoral campaign, and we said no. We waited until they lost, we turned it to them. And then it just vanished into, I mean, that nothing has happened because the new government has no interest in transforming. They think this is reconciliation. The church, the embracing, reconciliation of the cross, and the daily masses is enough. It's very complicated that you have bodies from both sides. They see this as a reconciliation monument. But obviously it's not for the left, which is really offended by the fact that there is a dictator being celebrated every day in daily masses and whatnot. So we basically, I mean, the most, so to speak, mediatic thing we decided is like that the dictator should be exhumed and brought to a family in Pantheon in the neighborhood of Madrid. And but this was the most mediatic thing. There is a lot in the document, very interesting things about transforming the monument, which I think sometimes, if the left wing, sometimes, I don't know.
So you did produce a document?
Oh yeah. Yeah, the only way to find this document is in our webpage because the government took it out from its own webpage. So I just uploaded it in my repository. It's a no repository, that's the only way. I mean, you can find it some other way, but it's easier. And it's a very interesting report. I can tell you more about this, but basically it said you cannot continue, you cannot make of this a reconciliation movement having the dictator there. So, but they said, the current government said that this would create social alarm, and that you have to undo state funeral is very difficult, and the permission for Franco to go into the knowledge of foreign was signed by the king, and then you have to undo this document by the king, and it's too difficult institutionally. And so then they are holding up to the place and to the program. But I think that in the future, I'm really confident that this will happen sooner or later.
Maybe we should stop here, and thank you again.